السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله، الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن والاه. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا، أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما. وصلى اللهم وسلم محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. We are, alhamdulillah, blessed. Imam here with us, Abdullah. The mic is acting up. And as you know, Imam Suhaib is, as we said before, ghaniyun an al-ta'rif. He's someone who, if he is in no need of any introduction. We all know Imam Suhaib. We know the things that he had done for our communities, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help him to continue to help our communities, inshallah. He is going to talk to us tonight about a very important topic. It's considered to be the Asluddin, the foundation of this religion. He's going to talk to us, inshallah, and educate us about Aqidah. Imam al-Bajuri, rahimahullah, in his Hashiyah, Jawharat al-Tawheed, Imam al-Bajuri was one of the grand muftis, grand sheikhs of Al-Azhar in the 1790s. And he has this incredible Hashiyah about Tawheed. It's called Jawharat al-Tawheed. He started this Hashiyah by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sending blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And then he said, وَبَعْدُ فَالْعِلْمُ بِأَصْلِ الدِّينِ مُحَتَّمٌ يَحْتَاجُ لِلتَّبْيِينِ. And know that acquiring knowledge about Asl al-Din, about the creed, about the Tawheed is a must. And that knowledge, that science, the creed needs to be explained. We have Imam Suhaib here tonight, inshallah. He will educate us about Asluddin, inshallah. I think he has translated a Hashiyah also, or a book about Aqidah. It's called Aqidatul Awam, Sheikh Ahmed al-Marzuqi al-Maliki. So inshallah, we hope that you will enjoy the night, inshallah. And that's it. Jazakumullah khair.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد سيد الأولين والآخرين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. We begin by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We send peace and blessings upon our beloved messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon his family, his companions, and those who follow them until the end of time. Brothers and sisters, assalamu alaikum rahmatullah. Alhamdulillah, it's great always to be in Southern California. MashaAllah, a lot of old friends and people that I've known for almost 20 years. Subhanallah. And it's always a pleasure to return and to receive, the warm graces of all of you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us and bless you, inshaAllah. These are very interesting times, no doubt. And it's very important that we don't allow ourselves to get trumped by all that's happening. And the Quran really talks about passions, how passions can be moved. And in different places we see that passion, لِكَيْ لَا تَأْسَوْا عَلَى مَا فَاتَكُمْ وَلَا تَفْرَحُوا بِمَا آتَاكُمْ, right? Allah says that, you won't be saddened by what you failed to attain, nor will you become overly jubilant by what you've been given, right? So this idea of sadness, happiness, and what really motivates those passions for most of us and a normal way also is the world around us. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the 3rd chapter of the Quran, وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ, right? Like these are days that come to you. And these verses actually came after, the chapter talks about the loss, the victory of Badr and the loss of Uhud, right? So with victory or with loss, right? These days come to you and they affect you. Our scholars were enamored somewhat by time and situations and the impact that they had on people. One of our teachers used to say, ثَمَانِيَةُ تَجْرِي عَلَى نَاسِ كُلِّهِمِ وَلَا بُدَّ لِلْإِنسَانِ أَنْ يَلْقَى الثَّمَانِيَةِ. One of our teachers used to say his poem, said there are 8 situations that every human being has to experience. حُزْنٌ وَفَرَحٌ وَاجْتِمَاعٌ وَفَرْقَةٌ, right? Happiness, sadness, being together, being separated, right? عُسْرٌ وَيُسْرٌ ثُمَّ سَقَفٌ وَعَافِيَةٌ, right? And then is ease, hardship, and then health and sickness, right? No matter where we are in life, one of those 8 were probably going to be impacting us. And the reason that they talked about these 8 is that they had the potential to impact someone emotionally, psychologically, and to cause them to act in certain ways. And that's why scholars would warn us about, for example, allowing desires to become a habit. So one of the great scholars said, إِيَّاكُمْ الْخَطْرَ, right? Be careful of bad ideas. فَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلْ صَارَتْ فِعْلَ, because if you don't, it's going to become an action, right? فَدِدُّهُ so meet it, or قَابِلُهُ بِدِدِّهِ, right? Then approach that bad action with the opposite. وَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلْ صَارَتْ عَظِيمًا, right? Because if you don't, then that action turns into like what you dream of, right? What you hope to do. And if that happens, فَقَطِّعْهَا, then amputate it before it turns into like what really starts to motivate you, if it's something evil and it controls your passions. وَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلْ, because if you don't, صَارَتْ عَادَةً, because if you don't, then it becomes a habit. And then it's hard for you to stop it, right? It's difficult to stop it. And Imam al-Maqdisi is a great scholar. He did a beautiful summary of Imam al-Ghazali's Ihya al-Ulumuddin. In his book, he said that all of the emotions, for the most part, whether good or bad, are never completely good and never completely bad, right? All of the passions are never completely good or completely bad. But, for example, anger can be good. Like today, if you're marching like Sister Linda and you got arrested, like that's a good thing. If you're upset, with people trying to shut down the BDS movement, like that's a good thing. If you're upset with, real causes in this country, right? If you're upset that you missed, an act of worship, that's a good aspect of anger that should be there, right? Love can be good and bad. You could love something in a good way, but then also when love becomes an unhealthy attachment, something bad. So the Sheikh, he says, everything when it comes to these kinds of passions and behaviors and character, the goal is balance. The goal is balance. So Allah says, إِنَّ الْمُبَادِّرِينَ كَانُوا إِخْوَانَ الشَّيَاطِينَ, right? Even generous people, if they're irresponsible in their generosity, the Quran says that they are actually brothers of the devil, right? You give everything away, right, instead of giving responsibly. So what can we utilize to help anchor ourselves in very difficult times? Because the goal of what's happening with this administration and the people behind this administration is really a hope of either shutting Muslims completely down, forcing them into silence, wrestling them into fear, into submission, or pushing Muslims into heterodoxical groups like ISIS and irrational, misplaced notions of jihad, so that they can justify the fear that Americans should have, the West should have, and now the globe. Islamophobia has now become a global cancer. Look at the Netherlands, should have. How can we protect ourselves from falling into really irresponsible apathy or irrational conservatism and control our passions? Is knowledge, is to learn. And to be honest with you, and I say this with respect, the Sunni Muslim community is one of the most arrogant religious communities I've ever seen in my life. Like, I've heard that Imam Atif is being given problems here, and I'm disgusted by this. Like it is actually to the point where like imams in this country are all watching this masjid now and saying like, why? Like, why would this happen to someone like Atif? Right? Someone who is respected, loved, like by ulama, by great ulama. He just quoted Imam al-Bayjuri, like 2% of people in California even know who al-Bayjuri is. Right? Sahib al-Jawhar al-Tawheed. That we studied in high school in Azhar. So this is not just here. Like every mosque I go to, the imam is like just completely mistreated by people. And then you ask these people like, where did you study? No, I read during my break on my Lyft or my Uber, or, you know, and there's nothing wrong with being a Lyft driver. There is something probably wrong being an Uber driver. But what I'm trying to say is like, why is the Sunni Muslim community the most anemic when it comes to its tradition, yet the most arrogant with people who carry that tradition? And there's a great article today on Muslim Matters. It talks about the American Muslims community war against its scholars. And I'm not talking about irresponsible relationships where scholars have absolute power and we don't ask them questions. That's not what we were trained in Al-Azhar, at least until Sisi showed up. But what we're talking about is a relationship of mutual respect, right? Mutual admiration, the ability to ask questions respectfully, good assumptions of people. Like today on Snapchat, I Snapchatted Abdullah Jafari's aunt, grandma, right? And she's like, I'm not cooking for you today because I don't have to work today, right? It's an auntie. It's really beautiful, right? And then someone wrote me like, aren't those kind of holidays haram? And I was like, yeah, exactly. That's why I Snapchatted it to 200,000 people, because it's haram. Like, I just put my business out there. Like, that mutual kind of respect, man, right? And just like trusting our leadership, trusting our imams, right? Asking ourselves, like, maybe I don't know something. Like, there is a possibility that you don't know something, right? That's why we say in actually his Hashia, al-Bajuri says, Adamu al-ma'rifa la yufidu wujud al-shay. Right? Just because you don't know something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Right? And look at Sayyidina Musa, who's a prophet. And Sayyidina Khadr, most of the ulama said that he was a wali of Allah. So he's not a prophet. And Sayyidina Musa, he knows that his station is higher than this person. But when he comes to him, hal tu'allimuni, the word hell in Arabic, kalima tufidu al-adab wa tadalluth. Like, it shows humility. He doesn't say like, yo man, teach me everything you know. Right? He's like, can I learn from you? Mimma, some, not all of what you know. Innaka lan tastati'a ma'iya sabara. You can't be patient. Sayyidina Musa doesn't say, you know, do you know who I am? Do you know where I studied? Allah talk to me. Like, I got all these ijazats, man. I can throw this thing on the ground, see that snake, pow. What can you do? Like, he doesn't do that. He says, Satajiduni insha'Allah sabira wa la a'si laka amra. Like, I'll be patient. And this is really one of the greatest travesties of our community, as we see a gulf enveloping between activists who are acting in the name of religion and passionately acting in the name of religion and doing great work, and then scholars who struggle to have language which is relevant, but at the same time, a lot of that is based in the fact that they're just simply not respected, man. And they're not treated properly. So the outcome is we have a community that is basically, especially the Sunni community, entertained but not educated. And you see this at our conventions. Very little symmetry. Topics are not really organized. It's important. Those are great events for a revival of Iman. But that's not education. Right? Education is the process which leads to learning. And it's the outcome of learning is education. And learning has tools, right? Has certain processes. So when I came back from Egypt in 2010, you know, I set forth with an idea of translating one of the major texts from the 11 ulum. See, Sunni Muslims are actually supposed to be educated on 11 ulum. Traditionally, mainstream Islam, until Saudi Arabia did to Islam what Trump has done to politics. And I say that sincerely. Just ask the people in Syria. and in Africa. Because wherever that da'wah has gone, it's destroyed communities. Doesn't build love, right? And I'm not talking about our graduates from Medina. These are great brothers and sisters. I'm talking about the irresponsible stuff. It will turn a child against his parent, right? It will cause communities, masjids to be destroyed like in Libya. And there's a great movie you should watch called Timbuktu. If Egyptian Islam has been, monopolized by a corrupted government, then Salafism has been monopolized by lunatic jihadists and hyper-literalist, puritanical brothers and sisters who, in the name of the truth, tend to do much more harm than good. And what has happened is we've become unfamiliar with our tradition, and we're not aware of the power of that tradition. And when I'm talking about tradition, I'm not talking about the traditional Islam of America that makes us apolitical. I don't know what kind of tradition that is. I'm talking about the Sufism of Imam Shamil of Chechnya, right? The Sufism of the Sanusiyin in Libya, right? The Sufism of Imam Abu Ghudda in Syria. Right? I'm not talking about Sufism that causes us to praise Trump and disparage black people. That has nothing to do with Sufism or works for the UAE. We're talking about independent religious scholars and leaders, right? One of my teachers in America, wallahi al-azim, he and his wife lived off an office refrigerator just so he wouldn't take money from anyone. And he would maintain his independence until communities began to support him. But within that tradition, and we see here IOK doing a great job of having this independence. Within that tradition is a series of understandings about our faith that are important for us to know now, because anemic in our education, arrogant in our assumptions is a recipe for disaster. And young American Muslims are very passionate. You don't find that arrogance amongst them. They're very passionate. They're looking for answers, but then they run into different groups, different ideologies. And don't get it twisted what I'm talking about. I'm not anti anybody, right? I'm talking about the extremes of all these representations, right? Azhar included, wallahi. But we have a responsibility as American Muslims to learn, to digest, to understand, to practice, and to synthesize. We have a responsibility to synthesize our message in this cultural reality that we live in so we can be relevant to people. I'll give you one example. How do we read the Quran? We read the Quran for yesterday. We should be reading it for now. Look at Sayyidina Yusuf, who represents every marginalized community in this country. He was abused as a child. He was homeless. He was trafficked as a human being. He was the object of sexual harassment. He was part of the prison industrial complex, and he experienced what it's like to be from the 1%. He experienced opulence. Like, his life touches on really every challenge you find now in this country. He was a refugee. He was a person of color. And other narrations even say he was an immigrant. So he experienced all of these kind of dynamics, right? Where's our voice, right, on this issue? We're too busy with other things. So what we decided to do around 5 years ago is to translate and explain one of the 11 core subjects of Islam, as mentioned by Imam al-Ragab al-Azhari, who died around 100 years ago. He wrote a book called Mabadi al-Ulum. And we believe that this system is very important for American Muslims, not so that they can join a cult or be part of some kind of, sheikh fest, right? It's not healthy to our community, right? When I join a group and that group causes me to then begin to hate other Muslims, then I have to ask myself about the sincerity and agency of that group that I've joined. Like Allah says, وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, don't split yourselves, right? That's a command from God. So the 90s in America were very much about authenticating what's the right Islam. That led to fights and arguments, and Orange County at one time was filled with kind of a mass graveyard of skeletons of people who had been cast aside in that horrible battle. And then 2001 was really about defense, and thinking about how we can protect ourselves from Islamophobia, and not having really the intellectual and institutional prowess to deal with that. And in doing so, we neglected youth work. We neglected the scholarship that was needed for this country and really pushing scholarly pursuits. And now I believe America is going through another reformation. A reconstruction of America is happening in front of our eyes. So we really need to ground ourselves. What's called ta'sil, right? To mainstream ourselves, if you will, within the broader work of Sunni intellectual tradition. And if you're Shia, I'm not saying this to be offensive, this is what I'm trained in, so please don't take it that way. So there are really 11 sciences that we should know, and the first science is Aqidah. And the majority of our scholars, there's four or five principles that may shock you about how Sunni tradition taught Aqidah up until around 75 years ago. The first principle was that Sunnis, the masses of Sunnis, should not be taught the differences amongst the different schools within Sunni theology. That right there is the opposite, I guarantee, of how most of you were taught. Most of you were taught this group is right, this group is wrong, this group is right, this group says this about the hand of God, this group says this about this group says this about Allah on the throne. Ibn al-Jawzi said, whoever teaches the masses this way should have his teaching license revoked. And there was reason for this. Scholars knew that these were legit issues of difference that did not take anyone out of mainstream Islam. Therefore, engaging the masses in arguing over these things, which even scholars could not settle, was a waste of time and, in fact, irresponsible. That's why Ibn Taymiyyah, interestingly enough, God bless him, there was a group of people in Damascus who were being taught this way about what does God's throne mean and blah, blah, blah. And they actually got into a physical confrontation in the masjid. And they wrote a letter to Ibn Taymiyyah. You know, we were arguing over this subtle issue of theology, and we started fighting each other. And we want to know what's the right answer. So Imam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala wrote back and said, what do you think he said? He said, why are you fighting? And then he goes into this essay about the sanctity of Muslims and the unity of the Muslims. He doesn't go off on some tangent. He doesn't even answer the question about theology. He goes into the issues of why you are allowing yourselves to fight and harm each other. The second thing that the scholars did is when they would teach Aqidah, they would teach principles. They would not teach al-juz'iyat to the masses, the subtle issues of theology. In fact, by and large, traditional mainstream Sunni Islam, when you look at, for example, the text that Sheikh Atif just talked about, they would teach those principles which are found most importantly in the Quran and in the Sunnah. Those clear fundamental principles. The third is that the goal, and this is something we should understand historically, that books of theology had 3 or 4 different reasons for being written. Number one was motivation and inspiration to strengthen people's iman. That's why sometimes people, they'll text me like my iman is so low, like I just read this book, but like it didn't really do a lot for me. What'd you read? Well, I read like why this group is wrong and why this group is right, and you know, that's not what you read if you want to strengthen your iman. It's like if you're married, you don't watch MMA to try to solve your marriage, right? It's only going to help you. Like we played Call of Duty for 3 hours, I'm still mad at her, man. I don't know why, dude. Right? Well, freaking playing Call of Duty, right? Another reason that classical books of Aqidah were written to respond to the doubts of non-Muslim polemics, right? Another reason that books of Aqidah were written were to establish within the secondary issues of Sunni Islam what scholars thought were the right opinions. And this is a mistake when people say there's no differences in Aqidah. There's no differences in the fundamentals, even between the Sunni and Shia schools, right? What we're talking about are secondary issues. And that's why Ibn Abbas, radiyallahu anhuma, he said that the Prophet saw Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the night journey. And Sayyidah Aisha said, whoever said that the Prophet saw his Lord, فَقَدْ اِفْتَرَىٰ عَلَى اللَّهِ كَذِبًا, is a liar. So she differed with Ibn Abbas on this issue. But she didn't like disown him and like open up a Facebook page and put him on blast. She understood this. Abdullah bin Umar and Sayyidina Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma, they differed over this whole, can you read the Quran when someone dies? This is something that's a very old discussion amongst the Sahaba. And none of them kicked each other out of the mosque or disparaged one another. Some of them did it, some of them didn't do it, as mentioned by Ibn Qayyim in his book Kitab al-Ruh. But Abdullah bin Umar took an opinion, and Abu Huraira took an opinion about can the amwat yasma'un. And that was it. They didn't like destroy the community on this issue. But now we find our community that we're taught these secondary issues. Then when it comes to the main issues of aqidah, we're illiterate. The last bit of information we'll talk about how scholars taught aqidah was mentioned by Al-Ghazali radiyallahu anhu and Imam Ibn Taymiyyah. So we can make everybody happy. We'll mention both. And Al-Ghazali said that, the masses, right? The masses of the Muslims, right? Their aqidah is the aqidah of the Quran and Sunnah. Without going into a lot of detail, Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, he said the same thing. So because of that, scholars wrote texts which were digestible for the masses of the people. And in the 19th century, Egypt, وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا مِصْرٍ. In Egypt, there was a movement to turn education into a public process, right? Socialized education, if you will, where everyone had access to education, not just the chosen few who were going to Azhar and becoming ulama, but the masses. And Egypt, under Muhammad Ali Pasha, decided to invest in opening up public schools for everyone, and they set really incredible goals of literacy and growth for their country. In fact, the first book ever translated ever taught in the Egyptian public school system was Sharh ibn Aqil, was an explanation of Alfiyat ibn Malik, which is a great poem some of us had to study. We know how fun that was. And in high school, listen to this for those of you who are Arabs, right? You had to finish Ibn Aqil. In your senior year of high school, you studied Asas al-Balagha of Zamakhshari. You had to do that to graduate. What I'm talking about, like really advanced texts, right? These are not simple books. And there was a scholar named Ahmed al-Marzuqi al-Maliki al-Husayni. He was from Ahl Bayt. His name was Ahmed al-Marzuqi. Ahmed al-Marzuqi was actually charged with creating a text which could be taught to kids in junior high, in Aqidah. And there were complaints from people like, little kids don't have time for all these arguments and kalam and, going into like these debates and, So he was charged with this, and at that time he became the mufti of the Maliki madhab in Mecca. He actually lived in Mecca, even though he was Masri. So he wrote a poem, and he was actually perplexed about what should I write, and he had a dream. And this is the unfortunate aspect of modernity on, especially the Sunni Muslim community. And that is that modernity not only fights superstition, it fights the supernatural also, al-ghayb, right? Islam came to fight superstition, but alladhina yu'minuna bil-ghayb, but we believe in the supernatural. So now when someone says, Sheikh had a dream, or my wife had a dream, or my husband had a dream, right? If it's something good. The Prophet said something bad, because I know if I say this, 1,000 people are going to be waiting for Sheikh Atif, not me, in the parking lot. You can snap it to me. But the bad dreams should be ignored. But the good dreams, the Prophet said, mubasharat, are a good sign from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he had a dream, and he saw the Sahaba in this dream, and they said to him, Iqra' manzumat at-tawheed. Read this poem in Tawheed, in theology. So he said, what poem? And they said, it's being held by the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Al-Qadi Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi said only 2 people can truly see the Prophet in his dream. 3 people. Number 1 is a Sahabi, because the Sahabi knows, obviously, the Prophet. Number 2 is alimun bi sifati, someone who knows the Prophet very, like all his descriptions. Number 3, sa'il alima bi sifati, is the person who asks a scholar who knows the characteristics like Imam Atif does of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he goes to the Prophet, and the Prophet tells him, read this text. He said, what? He said, what text? He said, اقرأ منظومة التوحيد التي من حفظها دخل الجنة ووافق الكتاب والسنة. He said, read this poem. Whoever understands it and lives it will enter paradise, and they will have agreed with what's in the Quran and Sunnah. Then he said, I turned to the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, and the Prophet recited this poem to me. When he woke up, he had the poem memorized. That poem, he called it Aqidatul Awam. Aqidah al-Awam, the creed of the masses. The masses creed. And that's the poem that we translated for you, inshallah. Will be hopefully released this summer through my institute. The name is amazing, Swiss, you know what I'm saying? Suhaib Webb Institute of Sacred Sciences. Swiss, check it out. Don't send me pictures of cheese though. My designer was like, I'm gonna put holes in it. I was like, don't put holes in it. That book was initially, and this is something very important when we're looking, like how do you find scholars? How do you know who you can trust, right? So after he wrote the text, he submitted it for peer review. Those of us in the academy, you know, other scholars looked over it. Then other scholars began to explain it. Then it was adopted and taught in Azhar, in Egypt. So those of you who are Masris, it's part of your cultural heritage, this book. Right? It was taught in Morocco till this day. It's taught in Indonesia. And it's basically taught everywhere except Saudi Arabia. So, no, it's not to be funny, because I think we need to hold the Saudis to be accountable. Right? I'm not talking about Salafism. I'm talking about something else. And that book was taught, widely accepted by everyone, and to this day, mashallah, it's still taught. In fact, I came across a handwritten explanation of this book that was done by a scholar from Indonesia, in Arabic, subhanallah. What does the book set out to do? Number one is to inform us of the 50 major obligations every Sunni Muslim should know about God, the 8 obligations every Sunni Muslim should know about prophets, and then the other obligations that we should know about the hereafter, qada and qadr, the angels, and so on and so forth. Right? And when you say this, people are like, I'm not a new Muslim. Oh, yes, you are. Right? That's what I'm talking about, that kind of pushback, right? The other thing that this book does, which is very beautiful, is it approaches education. And this is a problem I have with Western Islam in general, especially in America. Not from the paradigm of authority, right? But from the paradigm of the ethos of a shared mutual responsibility. Like all of us are like each other's personal trainer, right? Pushing each other to Jannah, right? We don't have to create a relationship of imam and sheikh and authority, because that can lead to corruption. But what we want to do is create a relationship of mutual respect, love and admiration, constructive conversations, very real questions. Like sometimes people will stop me, or even on Snapchat, and they'll write me and say like, I'm so sorry, I need to ask a question. Like, why would you be sorry that you need to ask a question? Like, why do you feel sorry about that? That's an awesome thing. Like, you know, when you ask a question about your religion, you're getting rewarded for this, right? You know, a woman came to the Prophet and asked him a question, and Allah responded in the Quran to her directly. قَدْ سَمِعَ اللَّهُ قَوْلَ الَّتِي تُجَادِلُكَ فِي زَوْجِهَا. In fact, she was arguing, and Allah said, indeed, He heard her. فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ ذِكْرِ. Ask the people, Allah says. So the second thing is that he approaches this from the idea of like, this is a communal responsibility. The third thing that the book does is, I mentioned this earlier, every principle he talks about is found in the Quran and Sunnah. The fourth thing that it does, which is also extremely important, outside of teaching us our obligations, is provide us answers for public life. You need to remember this. This is very important. That traditional writers of theology for the masses focused on two things: helping you have a private relationship with God and a fruitful relationship with the society that you live in. This is very important to understand. So they would take وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُرُ اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ حُنَفَاءَ. You've been ordered to be sincere, right? But they would also couple that with كُنْتُمْ خَيْرَ أُمَّةٍ أُخْرِجَتْ لِلنَّاسِ. You're the best community sent to benefit people. So classical books of normative mainstream theology set out with the following goals: to teach people the obligations that they needed to know, to be certainly recognizable in their Islam, because now we have a left in this country which in some ways is unrecognizable as a Muslim. Secondly, was to prepare them for to prepare them in a relationship with Allah based on sincerity, love, admiration. And thirdly, to prepare them for public life. And that third piece tends to get forgotten a lot. Right? We tend to think of worship as being something that's going to push us back into the closet. And knowledge is something that's going to put us back in the closet. When I lived in Egypt, we used to read with a great teacher from Jazair, Algeria, and Algerians are known for their temper, you know. So we used to be very scared of this sheikh, actually. And we used to go, Sheikh Muhammad Mahdi, and we used to read to him every morning in what's called Zahara. And we would read 5 books to him every day. The Muwatta, Jami' Jawami', right? Sahih al-Bukhari, 2 books in the Shafi'i madhab, and 1 book in language. 5 books. And one day, like, we'd been studying with him for a few years, he said, like, at least pray 2 rakat, man. Like at least do some, go give sadaqah, like take whatever you've learned and calibrate this into service to people. Right? Just don't learn to learn, but learn to calibrate the benefit of the people. And that's why the Prophet said, خَيْرُ النَّاسِ مَنْفَعُ لِلنَّاسِ. The best of you are those who benefit people. Aqidah sets out to do 3 things for you. You need to remember this as far as cognitively and spiritually and practically. Number 1 is it tries to help you enhance your iman. And it does that in 2 ways, as mentioned by the great writer in a book, Muwafaq. Number 1 is إثبات العقائد الإسلامية, right? Is to affirm what is really Islamic belief. Number 2, within that idea of learning, is in iman, is to refute doubts that you may have, right? It's okay to doubt, but your responsibility is to address those doubts, right? And that's why the man comes to the Prophet in Sahih Muslim and says, you know, I have this really crazy question, but I'm like freaking out, dude. Like, I want to ask you. And the Prophet ﷺ says, like, really, is it that bad? And then he starts to get nervous. He said, Naam ya Rasulullah, bala, like it's really bad. And then the Prophet said, really bad to the point that you don't want to say it? He said, yes. He said, ذَاكَ صَرِيحُ الْإِيمَانِ. The Prophet said to him, that's pure iman. That battle that you're going through, the ability just to have a strategy and think about what bothers you is a sign that you're pushing back. That's a sign of faith. That's why Imam Muslim is a genius. He put this hadith under belief. He didn't put it under a chapter on doubt. He didn't put a chapter in salah. He put it under bab al-iman. The second thing that iman does for us studying aqidah, after enhancing our iman, is to enhance our Islam. And what I mean here by Islam is our worship. So when I study aqidah, like my dua should be more like meaningful, right? When I study aqidah and I see Muslims are trying to split and divide instead of, this is a time of community organizing, not with ourselves, but with other communities, right? I'll react to that and say, no, aqidah encourages us to be together. Right? Look at the Sahaba. They were divided, they learned, they became brothers. We, especially if we're converts, unless we're from the jungles and rolling 60s, we were brothers and sisters. We learned and we became what? We became divided. What's wrong with us? Right? What happened to us? We're so successful at destroying ourselves. Like we all got so many gunshots in our feet and we're all holding a gun. So enhancing our Islam, our worship, and our commitment to things around us. So now as we see marginalized communities in this country, now as we see the opportunity for intersectionality with other communities, our belief in Tawheed reinforces our respect for those around us. So the first hadith we learn from our teachers when we study hadith, Ar-Rahimun yarhamuhum ar-Rahman. The merciful one is, God is merciful to them. The last thing that aqidah does is enhance our ihsan, our tasawwuf, tazkiyat an-nafs. Whatever you want to call it, I don't care. And we'll talk about why in a minute. So aqidah, at an individual level, reinforces our relationship, our private maximum doesn't become the public minimum, right? It reinforces our own relationship with God. It makes my prayer richer, makes my dhikr richer, my relationship with God more meaningful, even within sin, when I turn back to Him. Then secondly, it encourages me to be active publicly in benefiting people. You know, when I was in Egypt, I learned a lot. And I used to see these weird minarets. And I asked my teacher, what are those weird minarets next to Bab al-Zawayla? And he said, Waqfu Tuyur. This used to be a waqf, a trust that old Egyptians made for birds. They were worried, like, if birds didn't have food, they would complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that they didn't feed them. Right, so the institutionality of Aqidah becomes really relevant through NGOs, non-profits, right, charitable organizations, social justice movements, those kind of efforts. Ummah Clinic, you know, is a great example of this. And then the third thing is to enhance our khashya with Allah and our hope with Allah and our fear and reverence of God and staying away from having a sick heart and being sincere, right? So Aqidah affects Iman, Islam, and Ihsan. And you can think about that in the Hadith of Jibreel. We'll take a few points from this book and hopefully you'll be able to see like, yo, I could really use this book right now. You know, like, this book could really help me in the face of Islamophobia. In 2010, the Islamophobes published a 372-page PDF called Sharia is the Enemy of America. Why didn't we go after them in 2010? And the organization that published that book has been labeled a hate organization. We're just not really there, man, because of all the problems we allowed to fester amongst ourselves. And then you see what happened. What is the boogie word now in this country? Sharia. I went to a masjid, and the masjid board was like, can you please just like not say Sharia, man? It's like, what is wrong with you? And they're accusing us of taqiyya. These people won't even say Sharia. Right? Where's the reaction to that? Right? But if we're divided and we're not open to the center and we don't let people come back and we're busy policing ourselves to the point that we become counterproductive in our ability to organize. And that's a problem. So this book, you'll see a few points. I'll mention them to you. Actually, I was going to teach something else, but then he announced I was doing this, so I don't want to blow it and get him in trouble. So the Sheikh, he begins his book, he says something very important. After his introduction, he praises Allah, sends peace and blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then he says, وَبَعْدْ فَعْلَمْ بِوُجُوبِ الْمَعْرِفَةِ. Right? He says something that's very important for young American Muslims, for educators, for policymakers and institutions, for people like myself who are content providers. He says, بِوُجُوبِ الْمَعْرِفَةِ. He says, you have to know that learning is an obligation. He says it really quickly. It's in the first, it's a poem, right? The reason he wrote a poem is because the majority of the world at that time was illiterate. So the best way for people to learn would be what? Like we teach our children, right? Through poetry. And that again shows us how scholars were in tune with the grassroots, man. Scholars knew what was needed and they reacted to it. So he writes this beautiful poem. He says, فَعْلَمْ بِوُجُوبِ الْمَعْرِفَةِ. Understand. The first obligation is to know. He's actually alluding to a principle that was held by mainstream Muslim scholars from the time of the Sahaba till now. And the Andalusians gave it incredible, especially the Malikis, incredible attention. And that is that the first obligation upon any human being is to think. Before Shahada, before Iman, before Salah, before Zakah, before Tahara, the first obligation upon anyone who wants to be Muslim is to think. Why is that important now? Because you think about what Bill Maher says. When he says that Islam, when I said Bill Maher, all of a sudden you paid attention. Right? When he says that Islam is anti-intellectual, right? That Islam is at war with free thinking. If you were on Bill Maher's show, you could say, look, Bill, with all respect, or William, with all respect, I don't think you know what you're talking about. And I say this respectfully because the first obligation held by mainstream scholars is to what? Is to think. Now, what does that do for yourself as you counter Sometimes irrational conservative Muslims, or Muslims who tell you ask too many questions, or Muslims who discourage you from getting involved and thinking intellectually, or invoke gender or race or social economic background or neighborhood to shut you down. When the first obligation is to think. And our scholars took it deeper than that. They said thinking is the outcome of a process. So مَا لَا يُتِمُ الْوَاجِبُ إِلَّا بِهِ فَهُوَ وَاجِب. Whatever leads to a wajib becomes wajib. Whatever leads to a fard becomes a fard. So whatever leads to the process of proper thinking in itself becomes a communal obligation on Muslims. What does that mean? That's why I'm on Snapchat. Now you understand how it leads to policy. Because it is our responsibility, someone like me who's nowhere near Imam Atif's stature, right? But has a little something, something, as we say in Oklahoma, to make sure that people can access that something, something. So now we see one line, a half of a line. It answers Bill Maher. It helps us think about policy in the community. Imams have to have the ability to teach. I tell people that, why did you stop being an imam? Because I could do everything but being an imam. You know, I got into an argument once with the board. They were like, why do these young people just walk in your office and ask questions? I said, because I'm the imam. That's my job. They're like, no. So then I was like, well, what does the imam do? And they ran off a litany of things that Azhar did not prepare me for. So one half of a line helps us deal with the notions of Islamophobia. If you're in the MSA, if you're presenting at a campus, if you're somewhere teaching and someone runs off their mouth and says that Islam is anti-intellectual, backwards, and encourages people to shut down their minds. And to be honest with you, that's a carryover from the pre-Reformation Christianity that they were exposed to, more than Islam. Your response can be, I don't think so. In Aqidat al-Awam, this really cool book written by this Egyptian Don of the Deen, the first obligation held by Sunni and Shia mainstream scholars is to think. Done. Because one thing about the Islamophobes, it's not really a battle for information. It's a battle on information. Right? It's a very different, subtle reality there. They're not really caring about facts. But when you're dealing with the people on the fence, you want to be able to bring something besides alternative facts. And that's why Imam Ibn Ashir, he's a great scholar, Ibn Ashir. He was an Andalusian. He wrote one of the most important texts. I'm a Maliki, forgive me, it's what I'm trained in. In our madhab, أَوَّلُ مَا يَجِبُ عَلَى الْمَنْ كُلِّفَ مُمْكِنًا مِنْ نَذْرٍ يَعْرِفَ. In this poem he said the first obligation upon any person is to think. So just imagine the power of knowing our tradition. Not to argue about the tradition, right? Not to get into fistfights about the tradition. We should be constructively critical. I can be constructively critical of somebody. Doesn't mean I hate them or I dislike them, right? Unless they're getting money from the UAE. That's another problem. And I'll let the politicians handle that. But when it comes to issues of theology, fiqh, whatever, adab, alhamdulillah. He said, min wajib lillahi 20 sifa. He said, the first obligation is to know, and from that we took the following principles. Number one, the first obligation upon every human being is to think. Number two is, very important, what about people who don't have the opportunity to be exposed to Islam? To think properly. The process of education. You know, I ask people this question about what do you think the first obligation is? And I tell them to know, they're like, no, it's not. I'm like, then why would God send books and prophets? They're like, oh, yeah, that's true. Why would he send books and prophets? What do those books and prophets teach you about? But what about fitrah? Fitrah doesn't mean that suddenly you're going to come out like Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani or Imam Malik. Fitrah means you have the innate ability, if you have the opportunity to learn about God. So that brings us to another issue, those people who were never exposed to Islam properly. Imam al-Ghazali wrote an entire book on this. Dr. Sherman Jackson, I believe he translated this. And al-Ghazali talks about the hadith in Sahih Muslim where the Prophet was asked by his Sahaba, what about the Bedouins who never heard about it? What about the Bedouins who were never exposed properly to Islam? We believe that, as the Prophet said, those people will be judged with Allah's mercy and justice, His rahmah and his adl. If we had time, if we did the whole course, we'll talk about what's called al-mumkinat. يَغْفِرُ لِمَن يَشَاءُ وَيُعَذِّبُ مَن يَشَاءُ. Allah can punish, He can forgive, it's up to Him. But we believe He will not oppress or wrong anybody. So again, an issue that comes up a lot is, like, what about people who never heard the message, blah, 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 blah. We say that their case is with Allah. We actually have a qaida, not the group, a principle that says, kufarun dunyawiyya. We say that we act as though they're not Muslims in this life, meaning we don't ask them to pray, we don't make them eat zabiha meats, whatever, you know, if they're your family. Or we say, لَكِنْ مَصِيرَهُمْ لَا يَعْرِفُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ. But their ultimate destination is known only to God. Only to God. That brings us into another question that's often brought up by counter-jihadists and Islamophobic bigots. And that is if the first obligation is to think, then why was the Prophet seemingly commanded to fight everyone until they submit to Islam? So just imagine, I'm going to keep saying this, from one word in a poem, how many issues we just addressed that are absolutely relevant to our community right now. And that's really how our interaction with the tradition should be. The tradition doesn't hold all of the answers for us because scholars were right and scholars were wrong. But the tradition, the scholarly tradition, is a source of inspiration for us to write the tradition for those who will come after us, and that we will add issues to the tradition. When I was studying Maliki school, I read one book called Mukhtasar Khalil. It's a simple text. And every time Imam Dasuqi, he would write in the footnotes, you know, like this, like this, like this, like this, like this to an issue. Then I asked the sheikh, like, why does he say wa nahwi wa nahwi wa nahwi, like this, like this, like this? He said, because he wants you to put something there. Like your generation will come and put something behind that comma. So you'll add an issue to the issues that Islam is continually addressing. I said, man, that's hard. He said, yeah, that's no joke. That's no joke. But the issue of perennial jihad, that somehow Muslims are, you know, forced politically to, like, at a moment's notice, at Sprouts, you sprout sudden jihad syndrome next to the cucumbers from the Netherlands and, you know, the organic beef chili. Or maybe next to the hot Cheetos and the strawberry pop. You lose it. What they like to call sudden jihad syndrome. And this is very real because if you think about South Carolina, people really fear sudden jihad syndrome. Whereas if you look statistically, I'm from DC, South Carolina, you hear this all the time. The state with the lowest per capita income in America is South Carolina. The state with whites from the age of 40 to 60 have the lowest life expectancy is South Carolina. This is the GOP's bread and butter. They're dying before 2020. Thirdly, the inability to access quality health care and affordable health care is most profound in South Carolina. But when people in South Carolina in the last Republican primary were asked, what is the greatest threat to South Carolina? They didn't talk about wages. They didn't talk about health care. They said terrorism. In South Carolina, you no longer have Steve Spurrier even. Nobody cares about South Carolina, with all respect. Maybe Myrtle Beach. But if you live here and you go to Laguna, why would you give up Bugatti for a Geo Metro? With all respect to South Carolina. But the point is, they've been educated on a fear that tells them Muslims are here to kill you. There was a study, and this is not funny anymore, man. I went to Auschwitz. It's not funny. I see what this can do to communities. I asked a 90-year-old survivor of the Holocaust, man, how did this happen? He said, we laughed about it in the beginning. We didn't take it seriously. We didn't react. We had people that went crazy. We had people that were apathetic. So it's not funny anymore, man. 4 mosques been burned down in this country in the last 2 months. Every week, I mean, I was looking at my Twitter timeline before that, it was like, you know, Logan's coming out, haha, can't wait. You know, Kobe and the Lakers, ma salama, look at the Celtics this year, what's up? You know, typical, you know, those tweets you love. Right? Roscoe's maybe closed down, get your chicken and waffles before it's gone. K-Day's the best you know, those kind of things. But then after January 20th, I noticed every week on my Twitter timeline, a Muslim has been shot. A Muslim has been killed. A sister has been assaulted. A mosque has been burned. So you better stop laughing. Understand that this is a very serious crisis of miseducation of a large amount of people, stoked and fired in the coals of white male privilege, because Islamophobia is the bastard offspring of white male privilege. We need to understand this well. But they will say, there's a lady today on my Twitter account, every week I'm like, you know, I'm going to get one Islamophobe in front of everybody, let them watch it and see what happens. This lady comes and she's like, yeah, Linda Sarsour is arrested, and like, it's because she wants to like kill us all. So I said, like, really? Yeah, Muhammad ordered you guys to come and kill us. So they'll use this hadith, I was ordered to fight the people, until they say la ilaha, until they submit to Islam. The challenge here is, if we say the first obligation is to learn, how do you reconcile that with fighting? If you have mainstream scholars saying the first obligation is not to submit or to be forced. In fact, we say, La ikraha fi din, it's in the Quran. There's no compulsion in becoming Muslim. And if we look at Muslim societies like in Egypt and other places where for many years, right, people existed with different religions and different faiths. I was one time, I pulled over. I was so angry listening to this Egyptian Christian brother on AM radio saying, you know, Muslims are in America to destroy us, to take us over, and to kill us. I called this dude. I said, my name is William, man, because I knew that's how I could get on. Use that white male privilege for something good. So I got on there, and then he was like, and I was like, hey, my name's Will. I'm from Oklahoma. And like, dude, this is like totally wrong. And then he was like, no, like, who are you? I was like, I'm a convert from Oklahoma. You know, Oklahoma. And then he was like, well, I'm manfash. I was like, manfash, wallahi. Ana ragul min Oklahoma. Awkiluhuma. Then he got really angry. أنا بحكي معه بالعربية لكن بصيغة الwhite man يعني. So he was freaking out. Then he said, William, you know that you are here. Wherever you go, you kill all the non-Muslims. And I said, then why are you alive? Is your granddaddy dead? Is the daddy of your granddaddy dead? Who's your daddy? Then he said to me, no, I said, and then the dude, the guy on the radio show, I don't know, is it Psycho Mike, whatever his name is, that's Loveline. But then he said, you know, William has a point there. You are alive, and your family's alive. And I said, is your congregation, your church still there in Skandaria? Is your church still in Skandaria? He said, yes. I said, well, then you're still alive, and your church is still there. So that means you're not telling the truth. Well, Allah, you know what they did? This is about 10, 15 years ago. They put me on hold. And they're like, you know, we're going to fight this guy, William, back, man. We're going to get him on here. They hung up on me. Point is, information is one of your greatest assets. And we don't have to present it in that way. And most people don't need to be talked down to or engaged in a cocky fashion. That guy, he deserved it for the sake of Allah. And that's why I challenge young Muslims. Now they have an app that says, you know, meet an interesting person for dinner. Right? Or it's not Tinder or Minder, right? Go have coffee with an interesting person. You go have coffee with some professor in, like, you know, black studies. It's amazing. Why don't we have one, like, have coffee with a Muslim? Right? Meet a Muslim for coffee and ask them all these questions. And then why don't we train people on how to answer these questions properly? Right? So how do we reconcile the fact that the Prophet is ordered to fight people till they become Muslim with the idea that mainstream scholars and wherever Islam went, people were not forced to become Muslim. They accepted Islam. But we have that text. So if we go to this hadith, one of my teachers used to say, as-siyaq nisful ma'na, right? Context is half of the meaning. And we go to how the early Muslims, scholars understood this hadith. We find that Imam Ibn Hajar, he says, الناس هنا عام يراد بالخاص. Ibn Hajar, a great scholar, says, the word people here actually doesn't mean all people. It means a specific group of people. Right? Ibn Hajar is not Suhaib, the liberal Azhari dude, man. Ibn Hajar. We go to what Imam al-Qurtubi said in the Mufhim, explanation of Sahih Muslim. He said, it appears that this word is specific to a certain group of people. This happens all the time in Arabic. For example, in the 3rd chapter of the Quran, الَّذِينَ قَالَ لَهُمُ النَّاسِ إِنَّ النَّاسَ قَدْ جَمَعُوا لَكُمْ فَاخْشَاهُمْ. They said to the Sahaba, all humanity has gathered to you. It wasn't all humanity. A nas here meant a specific group of people. So who are those people? We have a rule in hadith that says, and Imam Ibn Wazir al-Yemeni, who's a great scholar from Yemen, may Allah bless Yemen. No one's talking about what's happening in Yemen, like absolute destruction of an impoverished people. Imam Ibn Wazir says that in this type of situation, it's an obligation upon you to see if there's any other narrations of this hadith which will clarify who people are, for example. So we go to another narration that says, Umirtu an uqatil al-mushrikeen. I was ordered to fight the pagans of Mecca. Now it becomes clear. Now we fixed it. So here's just one example of one line, half a line of a poem that we took now 4 or 5 major issues that affect policy in the Muslim community, institutional and imam policy, the community's policy, deals with people like Bill Maher, and also deals with the concerns of the Islamophobes from one word from our tradition. We'll take one more point and we'll stop because it's late, and I appreciate you guys being patient. But then the Sheikh, he talks about مِنْ وَاجِبِ لِلَّهِ عَشْرُونَ صِفَةً. He says that God, you have to know 20 things about God. We won't go through all 20, we'll go through 14. Quickly. Our scholars taught principles of God, not even the names of God, the 99 names. Maybe some people are asking, like, why don't you teach 99 names? You know why? Because scholars didn't agree on the authenticity of the hadith about what those names are. So what did we say that early mainstream scholar tried to do? Keep the masses of the community away from what? From differences, because usually we lack the maturity to differ without being disagreeable, as Martin Luther King Jr. talked about. Right? The worst thing you can do is give your child a reason to argue with your other child. You know what happens. So instead what scholars did is what's called istiqra, which means a survey. They surveyed the sacred texts, and they said, you know what, there are 20 attributes of God, 20 qualities of God that will prepare people to have a relationship with Him and to engage public life. Why is that important? Remember this, early Muslim theology, and even Sharia, ironically, developed geographically in lands that were minority Muslim. I think people don't understand this, right? Outside of the Arabian Peninsula, Iraq, Sham, Misr, the eastern coast of Africa, right? Later on, Sindh was majority non-Muslim. So imagine this, Imam Shafi lives in Iraq and the majority of its citizens are not Muslim. Imam Ahmed lives in Iraq and the majority of its citizens are not Muslim. So the idea that Sharia was inbred out of a monolithic cultural system is not historically valid. It's very powerful. It's very important to know that. As did our theology. So we said, and I want you to remember this, I'm pushing you, I know it's a weeknight and people are tired, but you don't have to worry about the Lakers making the playoffs this year, so you got no stress. What means stop, man? The truth, man. Love the truth. Paul Pierce, we gave you Paul Pierce, the truth. But, you know, I'm a Celtics fan, so I got, you know what I'm saying. And when we lost in 2010, you guys blew up my Twitter page, right? So payback. We said that mainstream Islamic scholarship, when it prepared us for theology, had 2 things in mind, right? Relationship with God and a relationship with who? Public life. If the scholars were to take you and give you all of the specific particulars of Islamic theology, this is very cool as a teacher. Would that be more apt to create intersectionality with non-Muslims? Or if scholars went and found universal principles supported by sacred texts, which one of those would allow you to create healthy relationships around that intersectionality? Which one? Particulars or universals? That's why they taught the universals. Unfortunately, when we learn these particulars, we've done it like it's on steroids, to the point where we not only have problems with non-Muslims, we have problems with Muslims. So in order to bypass that and to give us what we need to go to Jannah, right, scholars taught us 20, if you will say, massive universals, meta-universals, so that we would be able to be healthy in our relationship with God and relevant in intersectionality amongst the broader communities that we live in. This is the opposite of how we were taught, unfortunately. And that's why when I used to go to Azhar, we had a great scholar who used to teach every Sunday morning. He was an old man, and he used to teach Hashiyatul Bajuri and Taftazani. He used to teach some huge books. And I went and asked him, I said, man, why did they teach these 20 principles? And he said, عندنا هنا بمصر نصارى. So do we have Christians in Egypt? I was like, yes. Well, do they agree on these certain universals? I said, yes. He said, right? To create the opportunity to work together and not split ourselves in a society. So we see here the brilliance of Imam Marzuki in preparing a text for the public. He understands, unlike people now, honestly, in the administration that we have, who are really unaware of the nuance needed for the public good. Don't you feel like the last 2 months, like the equilibrium of America's just like gone out the window? You worry. People are scared. I talked to a mental health provider. She said, I'm booked. People are freaking out. It's like Rick and the Walking Dead. They're waking up in hospital like, what happened? Agent Orange. So what are those 20 principles? We'll take a few of them and I'll show you how we apply them, and we'll stop, inshallah. And then inshallah, hopefully when the book comes out, you'll be able, I'm not trying to shamelessly plug it, you know what I mean, but I am. Check it out. And then I plan to teach this, record it professionally. There's actually lectures on YouTube now I put up, kind of like Khan Academy, of this book, up and now about, I think, 24 or 25, all 4 minutes long, 5 minutes long, right? Where I take just a little issue from the text, explain the text, give it to you, talk about why it's practical to you, and move on. The Shaykh, he says, these are the 20 qualities we should affirm to God. He said, فَاللَّهُ مَوْجُودٌ قَدِيمٌ بَاقِي مُخَالِفٌ لِلْخَلْقِ بِالْإِطْلَاقِ. So he said, the first thing is we believe God exists. Right? In the text, we talk about that, God's existence, what that means. Right? But our scholars call this wajibul wujub, because the idea was that nothing happens without a cause. And the ultimate causer is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? فَهُوَ مُسَبِّبْ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ. So everything around us is a cause, caused by Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. What's the impact of that on your Islam and your Iman, and of course your Ihsan? I said it hits 3 areas. On your Iman, when you read the book, because of time, talk about the idea of believing in God, blah, 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 the arguments, so on and so forth, slick neo-atheism, we deal with that. That strengthens your Iman cognitively. Secondly, how does it strengthen your Islam? When you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, you're going to be more apt to obey Him, right? And more honest and integral and having fidelity in your servitude towards Him. Number 3 is in your ihsan. When you know you're being watched, you stay away from evil, right? Muraqabah. So one of my teachers used to say, min thamarat ma'rifatul wujud tarku dhunub. Shaykh used to say to us, the fruit of knowing that Allah exists is to leave evil. What would the opposite of his existence be? Al-adam. So in one word, you take 2 obligations. One is an obligation to affirm. The second is an obligation to deny. I didn't talk about this, by the way, because of time. And also, it's a little deep. But in between this part of the book and the first part of the book, there's an entire chapter on logic. Our scholars, Sunni mainstream Islam, considered the study of logic an obligation. Why? Because the arguments around God were rooted in logic. Right? And it's fascinating. Whether you agree with it or not, it's very fascinating. And when you deal with, again, people who say, like, y'all hate the West. Listen, man, we took Aristotle, reformed him, cleaned him up, introduced him into theology, and really birthed the theology and the scholastic arguments of St. Thomas Aquinas. This came from Ibn Rushd, his family. who he came to Andalusia and studied with the awlad of Ibn Rushd as a Catholic. But we don't have time for that. The first, Allah exists. The opposite, He doesn't exist. How should that impact us? Ibrahim ibn Adham was asked once by a young man. He said, I can't stop doing evil. He said, okay, well, the next time you want to do evil, get a new earth to live on, eat from something that Allah hasn't given you, go somewhere where Allah can't see you and do it. He said, I can't do that. He said, well, then what are you doing? So the thamarat of wujud is passion. That's why those magicians, وَأُلْقِيَ السَّحَرَةُ سَاجِدِينَ قَالُوا آمَنَّا بِرَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. Right? Those magicians, when they realized God exists, they saw those miracles of Moses, they became passionate. The second quality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He mentions, and we'll make it quick inshaAllah ta'ala, is He has no beginning and no end. Qidam and baqa, third and fourth. Huwa al-awwalu wal-akhiru. Found in the Quran. Don't ask me what's the dalil that God exists in the Quran. I'm going to ask you to go. Sprouts is still open, man. I hope. But, and something interesting, we don't have time, is that everything I'm talking about now is found in Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. لأن اسم تدل على وجود ذات. Because the name of something implies that it exists. But Allah has no beginning and no end. Al-Qidam wal-Baqa. Imam Abu Zayd al-Qayrawani said, لَيْسَ لِأَوَّلَيْتِهِ لَيْسَ لَهُ أَوْلَوِيَّةٌ وَلَيْسَ لَهُ أُخْرَوِيَّةٌ. He has no beginning, no ending. Subhanahu wa ta'ala. We gave the evidence from the Quran. Also the Prophet in a number of narrations said, oh Allah who has no beginning and no ending, I ask you, what should be the impact of that on our iman, and our Islam, and our ihsan, is zuhd in this life. To understand, like, it ain't all about IG eyebrows, man. Like, life goes on, bro. Right? It ain't all about having a six-pack, or getting the I-8, or being on fleek. Right? Narcissism and this investment in this world. Right? It's good to look good, and it's good to be, enjoying nice things, but don't allow it to own you, because these things, كُلُّ مَنْ عَلَيْهَا فَانٍ. Everything's going to go. وَيَبَقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ ذُو الْجَلَالِ. But the only thing that's going to stay is Allah. So now my investment in my worship, وَالْبَاقِيَةُ الصَّالِحَاتِ, right? Those good deeds that I do, I see them now as a long-term investment. So my passion is directed in the right way. It doesn't mean I don't like to look good or be on fleek. You know what I'm saying? That's normal. But not to the point where it controls me and takes me away from what's really important. So the outcome of understanding Allah has this infiniteness is what? Priorities. That's why one of our teachers said the greatest sign of zuhud is ma'rifatul awlawiyah. Right? The greatest sign of being, aware that this world can't control you is understanding priorities. What really matters. So if I'm called to go march with women, or go and do laser tag with my friends, or play Call of Duty, or Battlefield, whatever, I'm understanding the importance of marching with women takes precedence. Right? If I'm asked, like now, we see lawyers all across this country in major airports who need food and water and snacks. Let's hook up some samosas with no spice, man. Because that's where the investment is right now, and that's what really matters, because that's what God loves. So now I allow myself, and that's why one of my teachers used to say, the outcome of knowing Allah has no beginning and no ending is the control of selfishness. To see ourselves as something more greater than our own narrative. Right? Not just to write the book of my day with I, but with we as a community. The last two, and we'll stop inshallah. مُخَالِفٌ لِلْخَلْقِ بِالْإِطْلَاقِ. Allah is completely different than His creation. So anything I come across that reminds me that is God like, this? Absolutely not. But we say this in three areas, and this is very important because I see interfaith providers who are very sincere. Sometimes they make mistakes. And that is that they have to understand that mainstream Islam, right, said that we see God really through three lenses: His essence, His attributes, and His actions. Dhatu, sifatu, and af'alu. So we say that huwa mukhalifun lil khalqi. Mukhalif means to be in opposition. Mukhalifuk, right? That means His essence, nothing is like His essence, and He's not like anything. And his actions, nothing is like his actions, nor is he like anything in creation. And his sifat, his attributes, the same. That's why we say, وَحْدَهُ لَا شَرِيكَ لَهُ. The last two, and we'll finish inshallah, قَائِم وَغَنِيٌّ, the all-powerful, the rich. The opposite of those things, مُخَالِفٌ لِلْخَلْقِ, would be tashbih and tamtheel, that he's partially like his creation, or his creation is partially like him, or he's completely like his creation, or his creation is completely like him. What's the evidence for this? لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. Usually when we study Tawheed, this is the only thing we study in Tawheed. Shirk, tashbih. But there's other aspects of it that we just covered. Qa'im, the all-powerful. Ghaniyun, the all-rich. That means Allah, what some scholars call as-samadiyya. He doesn't need anything, but he gives everything. Huwa yut'imu wa la yut'am. He provides. He doesn't take from anyone. How should that impact our lives? That should cause us to be brave. Who has your back, man? Is the one who can give you all. That should cause us to be passionate about the marginalized, right? Those who are struggling, like me, a white person, to own that privilege and to be careful of that privilege, right? That's the outcome of understanding qa'im, that it will never leave me. Ghaniyun, I don't have the right to have that kind of problem. يَسْتَكْبِرُونَ فِي الْأَرْضِ بِغَيْرِ الْحَقِّ, as Allah says in the Quran. But it also should inspire us to live lives that are faithful and rooted in principle. And I'll give you one example and we'll stop. Because we said the goal of this aqidah is to cause us to have a relationship with God, but to be committed to societies that we live in to bring benefit and goodness. Through intersectionality, cooperation, coalition building, and individually if I must. In Andalus, a lot of people tell me I'm young, I can't do this, I'm young. Not I, them. You're like, yo, what's wrong with being young? You find a great story of a person who understood that, and as parents sometimes, man, we don't parent to inspire, we parent to intimidate. That's a problem, man. Like what Sheikh Suhaib Mullah said, non-Muslims, right, they love their kids, right, but we raise our kids. Like he said, so something like, we love our boys, we raise our daughters. That's what he said. We parent based on it. The brother told me the other day, he's like, man, I don't know what kind of world I'm bringing my son into. It's like the worst world in the world, blah, blah, blah. That's not how you want to teach your kid, 2 years old. Welcome to the worst world ever. No, man, the worse it is, the greater opportunity there is to do good. I tell my mother this all the time. I used to spill the cereal. I'm like, well, now I get the chance to clean it up. She's like, that logic doesn't work. Works for me. Right? Point is, the greater mess, the greater opportunity you have to do something good. And if you acknowledge, if you're going to tell me, oh my God, things are worse than they've ever been, then you don't have an excuse not to be active. If the house is on fire, you better grab a hose. But here's a young man, Muhammad ibn Amir, who is excuse my language, what we call a mueller. In English, a hamar. Not as you understand, don't laugh. This is before you guys turned into a dirty word. Hamar is the mueller, the guy who goes with you to Walmart because there are no carts, with his donkey and carries your stuff home for you. In Masr, some places in Masr, we have Webb. Now they do the bucket. You put your groceries in the bucket, you roll it up the window. You know what I'm talking about? Don't drop the eggs. I don't know if you have it in Pakistan, Somalia, Habasha, and Egypt. Certain places you go, do with a donkey, will hook you up because they don't have a cart. So he was sitting with his friends. This is mentioned in the book Tarikh al-Andalus. He was sitting with his friends, and he said to his friends, when I become the king of Andalus, what will you ask me? They said, come on, man, stop. You're 16, and you're a mueller. Hello, you don't even have a horse. You got a mule. He was like, no, but when I become king of Spain, what will you ask me? First one said, really? He said, yeah, but swear, because in those days, the oath was like a signature. So the Imam has to enforce the oath. And you're going to want to hear this story. I know you got to go, but this story, you're going to love it. And if you leave, you're going to be like, man, I missed it. I hate myself. Not my problem. He said, I'm a mueller, but I will become king of Spain. Swear by Allah what you want. He said, first guy said, okay, if it happens, I want gardens. Hook it up, Basatin. He said, I got you. I got you. He said, Wallahi. He said, Wallahi. Second guy said, I want stables, man. I want horses. Give me some horses. Wallahi, wallahi. Got you, bro. Third guy said, get out of here, man. Stop being stupid. Oops, sorry, little kids. Stop being ignorant. He said, okay, just play along, man. He said, when this fool becomes the king of Spain, put me on a donkey, turn me backwards, ask people to pellet me with vegetables. He said, wallahi. He said, wallahi. You know what he did? How many times do we allow aversion to control us instead of sparking passion? When I first became Muslim, I had this Arab guy tell me, you will never learn Arabic. I said, okay. Right? He said, you will never memorize Quran. Okay. Right? Don't let people do that to you. Like, turn the logs of their hate into what burns your fireplace, man. Because the reason they're telling that is because you make them insecure because they see your greatness. And nothing intimidates people like greatness. So he decides, I'm not going to be a donkey man anymore. I'm going to become a policeman. So he leaves his donkey, sadly, probably the donkey from Shrek, goes and becomes a policeman. And you know why he does that? That's the second thing you have to do in life. You got to be honest in assessing yourself. So he's passionate, then he's honest. He says, you know what? I'm just a donkey man. Donkey man and the king are not close. But closer is a policeman. One step closer. So he's honest in his assessment. He's strategic in his thinking. 5'3" brother comes to me and says, yo, man, I want to be LeBron. Bro, like, I know you want to be LeBron, but is your vertical like 85 inches? Because, like, you 5'3", dude, like, it ain't going to happen. Being honest, not being delusional. He becomes a chief of police. He works hard. It's the third thing. He worked hard, man. He worked so hard, he became chief of police. Chief of police of Cordoba is like the chief of police of LA with less headaches. Ain't Daryl Gates, that's for sure. Then the king of Spain dies. And the Umayyads, we know how careful they are about doing everything they do. Very paranoid family. They say to themselves, we need to choose a king, but he has to be majhul al-nasab, wa majhul al-hal, but he has to be unknown to the people. Because if we choose someone that's known, he'll take over the kingdom, kill us. You know how it goes. Muslim Spain was not what you think it was, by the way. It was not, it was like something from, like, you know, the movie Colors, man, for real. So this guy says, I know someone completely good for this job. Totally unknown. In fact, they say he was a donkey man. Hush your mouth. No, a donkey man, I swear to God. That's the king. He became king of Spain. This dude, legit, became king of Spain. It's a true story. It'd be a great movie. Why are we not supporting Lena Khan to tell the story? Our brilliant sister, or Brother Murad. He becomes king of Spain and he changes his name. Al-Mansur, the one helped by God. Because he said, I have no power. If you've been to Spain, you've seen, La ghaliba illallah, la ghaliba. He wrote that. He remembered that all power, all richness come from God, not from me. So the whole time I trusted him. When he became the king of Spain, you know what? Spain was a mess. Andalus is not an Arabic word. It's a Berber word. You know what it means in Arabic? Bilad al-shayateen. Bilad al-mujrimeen. The Arabs used to say, man, don't go to Andalus. It's like run into some white walkers over there, boy. It's cray. So he said, this country's cray. Cray, cray. Crazy. So I'm going to lay out a 30-year plan to change this country. 10 years to Iman, 10 years to education, 10 years to defense. That's how Andalus became the Andalus that you know, because Allah blessed him to do that. Then one night, he's in his 60s. He's sitting with his people. Andalus is cool. 2 million books in the library. Jewish professors, fire worshiper professors. Andalus is holding it down. Chinese people teaching the Arabs math. And it's true. He brought all those people there because he understood the power of people. And he knew that Aqidah was about public life, being responsible for how you live in a society. So he says to his fellows, he's clean, yo, he's clean. Hickey Freeman suit or something. And he says, y'all know what I used to be? They're like, yeah, the chief of police. He's like, nah, man. Before that, you know what I used to be? They're like, yeah, a policeman. He's like, nah, man. Before I was a policeman, they were like, who are you? Who's your daddy? Who's your grandpa? He said, I used to be a mueller. I used to be a mueller, a donkey man. Not going to say in Arabic, in the masjid. And they said, stop lying. Don't say that about yourself. How dare you disrespect yourself like that? He said, no, man, I was a mueller. I was. You don't believe me? Guards, go to this khukh. If you're a Masri, you know what is a khukh. Go to this little hut and bring these 3 guys to me right now. Here's an important lesson. If you have no goals in life, you will end up doing the same thing you did 30 years ago. Those 3 dudes who are now old and taking a leave were still there with their donkeys, albeit different donkeys. They brought them and they were like freaking out. Yo, where are we going, man? Is there a new executive order? What happened? What's going on, man? Who signed what? And then they got into his castle and they saw him. I'm not making the story up. It's in Tariq al-Andalus. And they said, Muhammad? And the guy said, Samahatul Malik. Don't call him by his name. Call him king. Like, nah, man, that's Muhammad, dude. What's up, man? And he was very humble. That's the last thing you should remember. Always stay humble with success. It's very important to be graceful with success. You know, never forget who you are, man. Never forget where you came. Ask your aunties and uncles like what they went through to get to this country. Ask your parents how they struggled to get you into college. The dua your mother used to make for you at night, man. Those kind of things will touch you. You'll realize, I'm not really working as hard as they did. And he said, you know who those people are? Those 3, and they were nasty because you hanging around with donkeys. You know who those 3 guys are? I said, who? He said, Asdiqai. Those are my friends. He said, come here. They were like, yeah, it's going down tonight. He said, do you remember that night when I told you, bi'ithnillah, I will become the king of Spain? What did you ask me for? You took an oath. And as the king, I am responsible for an oath. And I heard you say it. First guy said, I asked for gardens. I said, give it to him. Walked out. Second guy, I asked for stables. Give it to him. Third guy, man, I forgot, man. لقد نسيت. He said, no. You remember. It was an important night in my history. He said, no, it was a long time. I was just I was playing around. He said, no. قسمت بالله. You swore by Allah. وحلفت به. Ask. Remember, we're talking about the attributes of God being powerful and the provider, right? This is the backdrop of this story, how it's turned into institutionalized public life, which is powerful and impactful. We see our brother Abdurrahman running for governor of Michigan, right? Calibrating his faith into serving people. Sister Ilhan, I believe, out of Minneapolis, right? Calibrating her passion and her faith into serving citizens, man, right? Clinic, Iman in Chicago, the great powerful work that's happening. Soup kitchens across LA, Islah, Sheikh Jihad, right? Great work is happening. That's that vein of understanding power comes from God. Third guy says, I said when he becomes king to put me on a donkey, turn me backwards and pelt me with vegetables because he's the king. It got quiet, man. And then he said, give it to him and teach him, Inna Allah ala kulli shay'in qadir. And teach him that Allah has power to do anything. He doesn't take credit. He understands this whole 45 years of this is all due to Allah's being the powerful and the rich and the one who provides. So we just took a few lines from, we only took 2 lines from a poem, right? How much of that is applicable
to our practical life within the cultural context of America, under the face of Trumpism and populism. Satan is the first populist, not Trump. And there's good populism like Bernie Sanders, Senator Sanders. But bad populism, the first is Satan, who says to Adam and Eve, a lot of us want to tell you to eat from the tree. It's a popular thing. Nasihin, not nasihun. That's populism. How are we going to calibrate moving forward? The dangers of going to the far right and believing that everyone in the West hates us and that, the only way to handle is to go loony. On the other side, where Islam becomes unrecognizable in the name of being hip and cool, by learning and taking the tradition and traditional principles and applying them to the contemporary situation, and then synthesizing our own message for this situation, providing solutions for the societies we live in. And that's why someone like Sheikh Atif is so important. And I'm glad I heard the community stood up and got his back. God bless you for doing it, right? Because it's rare to find in America a Jedi Knight. And this is a Jedi Knight. And you're going to be like, well, he doesn't act like a scholar. You know why? Because he was told not to his whole life. He was trained by great learned people who told him, stay humble, stay normal, right? If he becomes rude and harsh, will people like him then? It's crazy. So I encourage you, I implore you, especially, I love Irvine. We've got a great this relationship, right? To utilize this person, right? To push him to teach you. Converts, especially young women, MSA folks, people that are retired, right? Start these halaqat with him and say, man, teach me these 11 ulum, right? Teach me these 11 subjects in a way that can empower me to stay balanced in the next 4 years, or 2, hopefully, if everything works out in 2018. May Allah bless this community. I have tremendous love for Irvine, in Southern California. It's a blessed place, a great history, great scholars, great families, very charitable families, sincere, young, passionate MSAers, right? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you, inshallah. We'll take 5 minutes. I think we ran out of time for questions. I'll only take the easy questions. And then we'll have to go, inshallah. Fatafaddal, inshallah. You can ask anything. Don't worry. Yes, sir.
You said that America is going through a reform. Why do you say that?
I think we're going through a reconstruction. That's the word I want to use. I just see it happening. If you think about how the job market's going to change, right? Automatic cars, automatic everything. Soon, the entire kind of blue-collar working class will have no jobs. What kind of impact is it going to have on this country? Politically, we're being pushed in a way we've never been pushed before. And in the left, we're reacting, and people on the left are reacting in a way that they've never reacted before. I think ultimately that may lead to some kind of reconstruction. I could be wrong. Yes, sir. So the series on YouTube is on my website, Suhaib Webb. Masses Creed. Masses Creed, yeah. Yes, sir. So this is a statement I've heard from people that, non-Muslims are out fighting for our rights and we're not there. I don't necessarily agree with that. Maybe he's not there, with all respect. But the passion of young American Muslims, the Somali community, man, especially on the East Coast, has been powerful. Young Muslims are out, active, engaged. I went to a march. I went to the Women's March in LA. I was driving on a highway. A friend of mine told me, hey, the march is happening. I went to the march in DC, the band, and there's just Muslims, a lot of Muslims. Right? I think the challenge is, listen, mosques can only do certain things. Mosques, their job is to facilitate learning and worship. Sometimes we want to stretch the capacity of mosques to do more than they can do, especially as a nonprofit. Sometimes there's limits. So now we're going to start to see institutions, it's kind of a reformation question, building outside of care, for example, right? These entities that are going to take on other issues. I think it's happening. We're a prepubescent community outside of the African American community, the black Muslim community in this country. we're relatively very young, and we're slowly growing into these responsibilities. I think it's happening, inshallah. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I mean, you've got, so the question is, she's a book publisher, may Allah bless you, mashallah, and does teenage books, and she's always being told, like, you can't publish this, don't talk about this, whereas these are really the real challenges that young Muslims are faced with. So she's saying, you know, should I address this? I think you should address what people are really going through. How do we calibrate real strategy without understanding real problems, real challenges, right? So the Quran talks about adultery. The Quran talks about alcohol. The Quran talks about things we don't like, talks about Satan, talks about Pharaoh, so that we can develop an effective strategy so that we don't become that way. No, I mean, well, then again, then we're reacting. So she's saying the fear is that community is already demonized enough in popular culture. Why add to it? Well, then, so we're now allowing others to lead our strategy. We've outsourced the strategy for our own community to the concerns of other people. Yeah, exactly. Don't say Sharia. We have to have enough confidence to drive our own message and drive our own concerns and be critical of our institutions in a way that's constructive from inside. It's very important. It's a sign of a strategically sound, nuanced, healthy community. No problem. Yes, sir. Yeah, so the 4 points we said for the king were, number one is not allowing his youth to be an excuse or a liability. Number two was to be honest with himself. Number three was to lay out a strategy. So the 30-year strategy, I forgot to mention. And the four is to stay humble. He was strategic, right? Didn't just say, I'm going to change Spain tomorrow. Lays out a 30-year plan for it. Faith, education, faith, and defense. Any other questions? We'll take a few. Yes, ma'am. You can ask me, you know, as I'm leaving. Again, just a reminder of how lucky you are in this community, the leadership you have, Sheikh Muhammad Faqih, Dr. Muzammil, IOK, this institution, Sheikh Atif. Really, really, once you leave something, you appreciate it, you know. But as you travel across the country, it's rare to see a community that has great nonprofits. You know, they have their challenges, like everyone else. But then you have great leadership, Sheikh Mustafa Omar, Sheikh Mohammed Mana, Sheikh Ahmed Bilo. You have great opportunities in this, Sheikh Muslima, even with women. So I encourage you, really, community will only be what you push for it to be, right? So engage and challenge and learn and continue to support IOK. Recently, great fundraiser to expand that project, mashallah. I know here we've been talking about a mega mosque for like 30 years, right? So the opportunities, take advantage of these opportunities. May Allah bless you. Barakallahu feekum. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Wassalamu alaikum.